Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. So we wanted to discuss a paper you put together, which is really interesting and crystallizes why Scotland needs to restore its constitution and its sovereignty. And you called it Seven Lies We've Been Told.
Yeah.
That most people, just sort of accept without questioning too much. And I think the first one that we hear a lot is that the UK Constitution begins with a Magna Carta.
Yeah.
So maybe we tackle that one first.
Well, yeah, if there's so many examples of this being upheld by the UK political and legal establishment that I won't waste people's time, but just go online, you'll see all over the place, UK Constitution. And it's the first example we have that proves that no matter what the treaty said, what the English political and establishment thought was happening was that England would continue and Scotland would just be gifted their history, their constitution.
Lucky us, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, after all, and truthfully, for a long time, and still today, you'll find that the rationale for this is actually that Scotland was backwards, feral, savage, undeveloped. It didn't have a constitution worth talking about. So of course we were elevated.
But of course we didn't sell 100,000 English people into slavery like they sold 100,000 Scots, which I would say is not exactly civilized, is it?
Well, there's the double standards are mind blowing. Funnily enough, the Romans did the same thing. They talked about these savage Celts, and you look at what they were doing. This is what empires do, and they build themselves up, and they trumpet themselves as them bringing civilization to the world. And these savage Scots, I mean, imagine the privilege of being allowed to inherit the Magna Carta. Well, here's what we did, the historian Kenny McInnes, an author, pointed out that actually this huge pride in Magna Carta should be blushing in shame instead, because alone among the countries of Europe did England have to bring in measures that restricted this total power of the monarch. Everybody else had something in place, and of course Scotland had quite a lot in place. And so when they're talking about Magna Carta, that's England. Up in Scotland, what's finally codified, which means it was there in place already, defined in the Declaration of the Clergy, 1310. Very, very clear who is sovereign in Scotland. Even more clear, actually, than the Declaration of Arbroath, which also makes it clear who's sovereign. And so they're busy. Their Magna Carta is busy, kind of restricting some of the powers of this tyrannical dictator who is their monarch, while ours are busy reminding anybody who gets to wear the crown, by the way, we are sovereign over you. You misbehave, you break faith with us, and we'll remove you.
Yeah, that's interesting, because obviously sovereignty in Scotland is with the people, whereas in England it's with Parliament. And the claim of right puts restrictions on our executive. And in fact, what I found interesting being an American is that a lot of the principles enunciated in the claim of right actually made their way over to the U.S. Constitution. Yes, if you think of there's some in particular I'm thinking of. One is you can't, under the claim of right, imprison persons without reason or delay their trial. We have a similar thing in our Bill of Rights. The government can't tell the courts how to apply the law. They have to be independent. Another one is protecting the courts against interference by the executive or the government. So these are all principles that they have been, you see them elsewhere around the world in so-called democracies that are upholding the rights of the people over an overreaching, governmental power. Yeah, tyrannical government.
Absolutely. It's something that you Scots don't know this. They've been taught that the claim of right is this horrible old sectarian document with no understanding of the context in which it was produced or how amazing it is that it actually codified these principles, and a lot more besides. And of course, there was a high number of Scots who helped to write the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So it came directly, and we don't realize that we're being taught while other people are celebrating their, their wonderful constitutions and these principles that they have, which are the gift of Scotland, of the claim of right.
And yet Scots are not aware of it. In fact, even Scots constitutional lawyers don't seem to be terribly aware of our constitutional, which I think is an aspect, as you point out in the paper, of our being colonized by the larger partner in this union. The other lie, another lie that we're told all the time, is that the crown has been vested in the person of the monarch since 1066. Now, with the upcoming coronation of Charles, this is particularly relevant. We'll nip this one in the bud right away. So, what would you say to that one?
But 1066 is when Scotland was invaded by William the Conqueror, and he defeated our King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. Wait a minute, nothing to do whatever with us, and and then go back to why they needed Magna Carta. Yeah. The UK Constitution, the Crown has been like this since 1066. A real tyranny of a thing that required Magna Carta to restrain it and to bring in some kind of rule of law, which backward, feudal, savage Scotland already had, and it worked. It's and there we have it. The Scots don't know that, but any child can tell you. What has something that happened in England in 1066?
What does it have to do with us? Yeah,
with us. Yeah. Scotland's crown wasn't established in 1066. It was established. I can never remember the date, but it was established under Kenneth MacAlpin, and that was sometime in the 8th century, or early part of the 8th century. So by the time Scotland came to the Treaty of Union, we'd had our own crown. Our own the constitutional character of that crown for nearly 1,000 years. Yeah. And by the time of Robert the Bruce, and I will tell you, there are some very eminent people who make themselves look rather foolish to those who know by talking about Bruce inventing the notion of the community of the realm. Absolutely not. He comes along. And by the time you get the Declaration of the Clergy in 1310 and our Growth in 1320, Scotland's had a crown institution for 600 years. Yeah. It doesn't suddenly start working completely differently. In fact, what was happening was at the time of Margaret, the wife of Malcolm Canmore marrying Margaret, she brought in an awful lot of Anglo-Norman lords, and the church got rid of the Celtic church and brought in the one in England, where we heard this before. And then her son began continuing that they had feudal titles, So by the time of Bruce, that's actually why Edward thought he had a right to declare himself overlord of England, because this little enclave, think of it like the city of London. The rest of Scotland is bad, right? But you've got this little enclave down in Fife and Edinburgh, which is, where the court is, where all the big important people are, which is feudal. And in the English system, the only people who count as human beings with a voice are the nobility, the lords and the knights, the nobles, and all the rest of it. They count. All the little people, the vast majority, are the kind of non-humans. They don't. But that wasn't true in Scotland.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is to learn that the crown in Scotland, it really turns the whole notion of what a crown is on its head, so to speak. The crown is actually the people. Yes. We have the power. And so therefore, the sovereignty of the people is really about our control over our own country and our own destiny. And that can be more different from what exists in England. So, but just the image of a crown, you immediately conjure up an image of a crown placed on someone's head, but you have to get away from that imagery to think of it as actually the community of the realm, as you put it, which is the people. Yeah. And again, that is not widely known in Scotland. Again, our own history has been covered up.
It's there in plain sight. We just taught to think so differently. Yeah. So when you have the clergy talking about the people having the right to appoint or remove a monarch, what you have to think when you want to understand sovereignty, you have to go, okay, who is the higher power?
Yeah.
If they can remove that monarch and his government, then they must be the higher power. So who, and that's what sovereignty means.
Yeah.
And that's a reflection of that. And that's why, to this day, the institution of the crown in Scotland it's not the same as in England.
Yeah.
The people are sovereign.
And that is so foundational, because that leads on to the third lie, really, that the resources of Scotland form part of the common assets of the United Kingdom. There's no way that can be the case, can it?
Well, they are vested, all the rules, all the laws, the petroleum, it's vested in the, but what the English have done, and their parliament have done, say it's vested in the monarch. No, it's not, but in right of the crown.
Right.
You see, in Scotland, it is not vested in the monarch in right of the crown. It is vested in the whole community of the realm in right of the crown.
Right.
Because we are sovereign. We are in a position where we can and have sacked the monarch, got rid of the monarch, got rid of the, and with that, the parliament decided what we were going to do next, referred to our ancient constitution. We are sovereign, and the right of the crown means the people. And
that's rather threatening to the English, actually. And I was thinking, no wonder they want Scotland's resources. If you think about it, we have 2/3 of the UK's exclusive economic area. We have more coastline than any EU state. We have most of the EU's oil and gas and renewable energy, most of the fisheries. But we've been kept down economically. So we have, say, for example, no modern seaports to facilitate trade between ourselves and other nations.
That goes right back.
Right?
That goes right back, yeah.
They're monopolies, you know, and the energy's been sold off to private companies. So we are enduring perversely high energy prices in a nation where we have energy riches, and that should not be the case. We have no state-owned national investment bank. We can't take our economic decisions on our own. We have to follow along with England, the Bank of England. So even our trading relationships with the EU were yanked out of the European Union against our will. So it's clear under these, and there are many, many other examples you could cite, why we are too valuable for England to lose, and which is why they're fabricating all these lies to keep us in the Union.
Exactly, and that's what's really interesting, is that it's all there if you look, but people haven't looked closely. Yeah. And so, you know, when we come to these sovereign people and the institution of the Scottish Crown, and people talk about wanting to get, you know, they want to get rid of the monarch. Well, I wouldn't argue with that, but I would never get rid of the Scottish Crown, because that's us.
Exactly. That's us.
And we're not used to thinking like that. And that's a tremendous, when you actually think about it, how tremendous that really is. You can have a thing called a vacant throne. And you know, if you've got no, like at the time of, you know, when Edward I invaded, or when Alexander was killed, or whatever, you can have a throne, a crown, and nobody's sitting on the throne. That's fine. But let's get rid of this wonderful and beautiful and powerful constitutional fact that the people are the crown in Scotland. That's the crown.
You have to condition people to think differently about what the crown actually is.
Let's start thinking like Scots. And the follow on from that is the Parliament answered to the people. The monarch answered to the people. So when the treaty was conducted, was concluded, the only authority that monarch could bring on behalf of Scotland to enter that treaty, or that Parliament could exercise on behalf of Scotland to enter that treaty, was the authority which they had constitutionally. They didn't have any right to take anything they didn't control, any authority they didn't have, and hand that over to the new state, the new Parliament in Westminster. You can't lease somebody else's house.
No, but that's exactly what they've done.
And the basis on which they have robbed Scotland blind.
They have. And the fourth lie is that we became a territory within this new state of the United Kingdom at the Treaty of Union. And so I think people need to understand that we're actually not in a territorial union. We're in an economic and political union, are we not?
That's what we're coming to, because the crown, the institution of the crown is the people. And therefore the Parliament and the monarch could only take what they had. political and economic authority, granted to them by the people, by the way, and removed by the people. But it meant that the territory of Scotland did not enter the Union. The assets of the territory of Scotland could not come under Union control.
See, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. People don't realize that. That's our oil and gas. That's our renewables. That's everything.
Absolutely,
our fisheries, our land.
It's anything to do with trade that comes into negotiation with the Union. But the actual ownership and the benefit belong to the people of Scotland. And it never had anything to do with the rest of the UK. So what they've done is they've just told lies, and they keep telling lies. Yeah. So they passed the Petroleum Extraction Act, the first one, I think, in 1934. And they simply describe the constitutional setup as if it was English. All these things are vested in His Majesty in right to the Crown. No, that's actually unlawful. That act has no force in Scotland.
And that wasn't even challenged, was it?
No, because it is amazing for how long and how completely the Scottish legal establishment and the Scottish political establishment
gone along with that
has accepted. I'm sorry, but they're English lies.
Yeah,
you joined the Supreme Court. Said in October that Scotland was a territory. This is absolutely untrue. And the argument behind that ignores Scotland's constitutional position, which is still in place. You wouldn't need 2 Crown offices if that wasn't the case. They're completely
to me, it's also interesting how the monarchs in Scotland were always different from the monarchs in England. For example, Mary Queen of Scots, not of Scotland, and that's for a reason, isn't it?
Because the Crown is not vested in the person.
Exactly. Whereas King Henry VIII was a king of England, King Elizabeth was Queen of England, but not Scotland.
Yeah, and they didn't get away with being despots in Scotland.
No.
First among equals. So the monarch represented the Crown in that monarch's person. Represented the community, the Crown, which was the community of the realm, and the authority, the sovereignty lay with the community of the realm, lay with the people.
To me, the real indictment of this union has been the impoverishment of Scotland, because with our resources, both human and natural, and the capital that we have, we would be a very wealthy nation. We'd be one of the wealthiest nations on the planet. And if you just look at our neighbors, our Nordic neighbors, Ireland, even little Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, they all are far wealthier than Scotland, and yet they don't even have the resources we have. We even have more resources than Norway. So if you look at it in that context, you realize the extent of the lies and the fraud and the theft that we have had to endure as a partner, so-called partner in this union.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? The point is, if you pass legislation that is unlawful in the nation of your partner, you're not behaving as a partner in a voluntary union.
Not at all.
So if you impose an alien, a foreign constitution on your voluntary partner without agreement, you're acting as a colonizer.
And you violated the terms of the treaty from the get-go.
Absolutely. So what we have is this is the Crown in Scotland. No, it's not. And you can't, and they haven't actually got around it because they have had to have a separate Crown estate. They just pass legislation and make it sound as if the Crown is the same in both countries. Because what that covers up is actually massive fraud. Under international law, huge. We remain a sovereign territorial nation. It's easily proved, and the only reason nobody has taken that, challenged it, pushed it, is because people haven't realized, because we've been so gaslighted for so long. But it's right there in plain sight. There you are, a sovereign territorial nation with the right under international law to control your own assets and resources in exactly the same way as, say, the Faroe Islands does within the state of Denmark. We should have that right. When we say, how can it be that this is happening to us? Well, I would suggest that you keep that phrase, Scotland is not a colony, firmly in mind, and then look and see just how prosperous any colony has been under the kind of vampiric
of a colony. They suck you dry, don't they? Which is exactly what they've done with Scotland, yeah.
All that wealth, all those resources in the mother country, back home, to you know, to build wealth and prosperity, and to leave those who actually own the resources in dire straits, which is precisely what's happened to Scotland. And yet again, it's on the basis of a lie.
Well, there's another lie, that the UK Parliament has been sovereign since 1689 and remains sovereign across the entire UK. So should we tackle that one?
Well, you know, here's the thing, what that shows, what that proves, and that we really, you know, these lies are what we need to bring to international attention, because they're crime. Every one of them covers a very serious crime against a sovereign territorial nation, a distinct nation of people who entered supposedly a voluntary union, and voluntary agreements are defined by rights and obligations on both sides. But we have had no rights, and they have broken all their obligations. And the proof of what this has been about is right there. The UK Parliament, the English Parliament, became sovereign in 1689, in the same year that Scotland codified the sovereignty of the people over their government, their monarch, their courts, in the Claim of Right. So if the UK Parliament is sovereign and has continued as sovereign since 1689, then it is not, in fact, what the treaty claims it is. That is this new state, this new parliament. It is merely the English Parliament acting as a colonizer.
Which is de facto what we have, in fact, yeah.
It's really very clear. If parliamentary sovereignty, which is unlawful in Scotland under a constitution that ran from the time, you know, all the way back, the clan system and Kenneth MacAlpin, all the way to the Treaty of Union, then that is a statement of colonization, that they're actually openly admitting Scotland is a colony. And then the Supreme Court denies it and says, but in the same breath says that Scotland is a territory like Quebec.
Yeah, and if you just look at the democratic deficit in Westminster, okay, at the moment we've got 59 MPs, soon to be 57. We're going to have 2 taken away from us. And there are 533, soon to be 543 English MPs. There's no way, not a snowball's chance in hell, that Scotland's voice is ever going to be heard. We will always be outnumbered. We are treated, we have the features of a colony. And I was reading Alf Baird's excellent book, Dún Hadden, recently, and he says that there are 3 features of a colony, and he calls them the 3 L's. One is leadership, one is language, and one is land. So he says in leadership, all the top jobs in Scotland, they're advertised down in London, in the metropolitan London area, for major businesses, for all of our big civic institutions, social institutions, and the Scottish civil servants, by the way. They're all advertised in London. The low-paid jobs are advertised here. On the language front, Scots language is looked down upon, and proper English is taught in our schools. So those who speak the Scots language, which is actually older than English, and English comes from Scots, are deemed to be invalid. And then thirdly, the third L is land. If you look at our land ownership patterns, they're so feudal. We have endured a huge loss of land to wealthy elites. Many of them are foreign. In fact, the largest landowner in Scotland is a Dane. And guess what? He pays taxes to the Danish government. I mean, all of these 3 L's are just another example that we are indeed a de facto colony. They may deny it, but they can't deny the evidence that this is what has been happening.
I think what they don't realize is that when they make claims, such as the Supreme Court made in October of last year, which is that the UK Parliament is sovereign.
That's the 6th lie, is that the UK Supreme Court is the highest legal authority.
Well, we'll get to that. That's the thing. But that court, of course, upholds the sovereignty of the Parliament, which makes it an English court, not a Scots court, because that's against Scots law. And they pretend it doesn't exist. They ratified the Claim of Right as a condition of the treaty and of the Union. It was ratified as a condition. And it was known, it was agreed, it was understood that the Constitution, that is, as Defoe calls it, the limits of government and obedience, that means a constitution, if you don't know, that's what it means, will continue in Scotland as under the Claim of Right. That means Scotland's constitution continues. For all that they say now, it was just a sectarian religious document. It was completely understood at that time constitutionally, Scotland would continue. And that was ratified by both parliaments as that condition.
Well, that's why the claim of right was inserted, because they probably didn't trust the English. They knew that this would happen.
They knew what they were doing. And
Yeah.
you know, they in with the religious stuff, but actually, the claim of right was very well understood in Scotland as a constitutional document, had been protected under pain of treason when William, having signed it, tried to change some of the terms of civil liberties, and they went claim of right. So he then tried to change the claim of right, and they went right, pain of treason. You know, not treason against the monarch, treason against the community.
That shows how important it is that people understand their constitution and the what actually limits power in their nation, and we don't get that.
We don't get civics in this country, and it's long.
No, and that's a huge oversight. You know, the SNP has been in power for how many years? And they could have, or even when we had our parliament, we could have been teaching Scottish history, Scottish constitutional law, the Scots language, any of these things that give people an identity.
Establishments feel that they are, and you come up in that establishment, no matter what it is, the medical establishment, the legal establishment, educational establishment, you come up with a narrative, and you know. And somebody comes along, some little naff nobody, and says, wait a minute, you've got this all wrong. You know, the reaction isn't, oh dear, have we? Well, let's show us and let's get it right. No, it's who the heck do you think you are? And of course we know. And actually it's embarrassing how much we don't know. We should all feel that. But you know, this was done to us.
Yes.
And where it comes to the collaborators who were profiting, of course, by us, by that little tiny group. And the result is that our politicians, our lawyers, our educators, our historians do not know. They do not know. And the truth is, it's there. You know, it's one of these things you look at and you go, that can't possibly be true, so it's not. But it is. It is that bad. And so, you know, we need to turn this on its head, actually. When they say, when the UK Supreme Court says, in line with the UK Parliament, parliamentary sovereignty has been in place since 1699. Nobody doubts parliamentary sovereignty. They are saying, legally, Scotland became part of England. England continued. You are a colony.
Yeah.
And even if they say in the same statement, Scotland is not a colony, if you state that a constitution that existed prior to the Union, which is unlawful under the constitution of your partner, whose constitution you ratified as a condition of that agreement, you are saying we are breaking that condition. We have a right to break that condition because we have the right to do that because we're sovereign. That is one of the really big tests for whether Scotland is in a voluntary union or is a colony. You have just called Scotland a colony.
Right. So when you impose parliamentary sovereignty, or you maybe call it parliamentary tyranny in Scotland, that is a direct violation of the treaty.
Yes.
And as you say, an act of colonization. There's no other term for it.
It's more than a violation of the treaty. It's a violation of the precondition of the treaty.
Right.
It actually says, without ratification of this 1606 Act, no treaty, no union. Yeah. For the continuance of this union and the kingdom and blah, 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 this will be ratified along with, not as an, along with the Articles of Union.
Yeah.
That's a binding condition. And when you enter a treaty and you immediately break that binding condition and treat it as if it had absolutely no force, no importance whatsoever, you are acting as a colonizer, and you've just proved the point.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just getting onto that next line, number 6, that this so-called UK Supreme Court, which is set up by Tony Blair in 1999? So it's not even that old, right? Is the highest legal authority in Scotland. So, you know, that is a bit of a, that's a porky, if I've ever heard one.
Well, Lord Cullen, who is not known for his pro-Indy views, Douglas Cullen, actually gave testimony. It was either the College of Advocates, but he gave testimony on the legality. He's very, very circumspect about saying it, but he quotes the fact that the claim of right. If you go onto the Westminster Parliamentary website, if you look up the claim of right, you will find that it says that the claim of right is a core UK constitutional document. which means that no matter what people
It's
say,
the only one that's codified, is it not?
it is the only constitution. It might not be a full constitution, but it meets all of the markers for an actual constitution. So a constitution must concerns itself with the relationship between government and people,
Right.
the limits of government, the limits of power, the requirements of obedience of the people, the rights.
Government's rule book. Yeah, it's how it should behave. Right.
And that's known as the rule of law. What makes something not just a rehearsal of the rule of law is when it is a source document for law, so you can have cases on the basis of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the foundation. Bring a case under that, which which gives us some very exciting possibilities here. And the other is that it prescribes that it does define that relationship, and that it prescribes a penalty for a government that violates those conditions. So it's not just this is what you're supposed to do. It's also this is what you're supposed to do, and if you don't, you're out. Much like, exactly like the Declaration of the Clergy and the Declaration of Arbroath. If you don't do this, you'll be out.
Yeah, it's like the U.S. Constitution. We have the impeachment clause. If a president violates the law, we get rid of him. Yeah.
So that was our version of impeachment. We had that. That is what holds government to account, and we can all see what happens when you don't have any mechanism.
Yeah.
So we have this extraordinary constitutional document which meets the definition of a constitution. Yeah. Now, there's a lot in Scots law that is constitutional that is not in there. The definition of the Crown is not in there, but it's elsewhere. So we have this. You come along and you say, okay, we are going to ignore, having agreed, and we're understood to have agreed to this, that Scotland would maintain its unique constitution, this would continue. We're now declaring from this court that this no longer applies. That is why, I suppose, Douglas Cullen pointed out, Lord Cullen, that the claim of right still stands. And under the claim of right, there is this right to remedy under Scots law. And within that remedy, what he didn't specify was there are two rulings by Scotland's Supreme Court, the Court of Session at that time. And those rulings were struck down by the non-parliamentary Convention of the Estates, described itself as a free and full representative of the nation. They not only sacked the king, and with him his parliament, because you can't have a parliament without a king. King and parliament, still the same in England, in the UK. But they struck down two rulings of the Court of Session as unlawful and explained why they were unlawful. Now that is sovereignty. That means
absolutely. The people actually striking down what the courts and the executive are trying to do.
And it explains why it's unlawful, and you can see why it's unlawful. It's a breach of justice. It's where, and look at the perversion of justice today, where the courts are used to go after somebody's political enemies or to shut people up, or Julian Assange. Look at that.
Absolutely. And the UK is trying to do away with judicial review even, and curb the rights of the judiciary even further. I mean, look what's happening in Israel right now. Where they're trying to control the courts. And people have to stand up and the fact that we have that right here in Scotland, that it's been buried and suppressed, we actually have it. We need to reactivate it. Also remember, the Treaty of Union is an international treaty. We never entered into a judicial union with England. So we need to become reacquainted with our own rule of law and our own constitution, so that we can
absolutely do. And if our lawyers will not learn it, then we will.
That beggars belief, doesn't it? Yeah.
We must educate our own politicians.
And the fact that the Scottish government, which is basically a colonial administration, went to the UK Supreme Court for permission for just an advisory referendum, which is doesn't even have the basis, a legal basis.
Well, let's talk about advisory referendums in Scotland. But just to finish that one off. So what Tony Blair did was he struck down another of the provisions of the claim of right, which was that we had a right to remedy in law, in Scots law, through Scottish courts. And what we have is self-declared Supreme Court. They can say they've got Scots judges in it, they can say anything they like, but if that court upholds English constitutional law over Scots in breach of the claim of right, condition, and the Treaty of Union, It is an English court imposed on Scotland, and it has taken away
pretty clearly
that condition set out in the Claim of Right. So that was why Lord Cullen had some doubts about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And it's about time that, you know, maybe we're hoping for too much when we hope for the Scottish establishment to actually stand up and fight for what is ours, what is Scotland's, under all the principles of justice, of law, clear principles of law, constitutional law, conditions of the treaty, conditions of a voluntary agreement. International law backs us, and yet they are still talking about how they're going to put together, you know, different alliances to have a vote. Right, okay, and you're going to make sure, you know, you will recall that during the referendum, despite the fact that the electoral register always has at least a 13% redundancy, that is to say that people will have died, moved, and there are errors.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Always, because you can't keep up with population movements to any better degree than that. So when you have an 87% return for any vote, you've got 100%. No election or referendum has ever had 100% return. If you see 100%, you've got fraud. But 87% would have been 100%.
The Soviet Union used to say they had 99% voter turnout, remember?
Yeah, well, guess what? Scotland had a 96% postal ballot return in the
2014. Yeah, that's impossible. That's impossible.
And the best you could have got, really and truly, would have been something like, you know, if you'd got 80%, you'd have been in the 90s in terms of a return, which would be phenomenal. But we got 96. Which is simply impossible. But hey, guys, we're going to have a vote. We'll get people to vote for Indy. That's what will happen. We'll have a plebiscite.
I think we need to actually appeal internationally. I mean, one thing that never occurred to the Scottish government, I guess, but maybe should have, is to ask a sympathetic nation, and there are plenty of them out there who really don't like the UK. Just picking a couple of
examples. Why?
Well, me too. Ireland and Argentina, for example, might be good candidates to propose that Scotland be added to the UN list of colonies to be decolonized. That's all it takes. Another UN member state proposing it. That's all it would take.
We couldn't do it, Leah, because that would be a contentious ruling. The UK would oppose it. It would go to the International Court on a contentious ruling, which would take years. We can have much more fun than that.
Oh, let's have it then. Let's have it.
Absolutely. We're a sovereign territorial nation. Yeah. We would like to put a public body in place to manage our oil, gas, and renewables. We will negotiate sale to England. We will take Scotland off the grid and have our own national grid. We will put people onto the renewables. We will sell the rest.
Raise our pensions. Yeah.
And immediately set up. Let's not call it an oil. Let's have a common good fund. And by the way, we need to expose the fact that almost certainly Thatcher took, when she sold our assets to private companies.
Yes, she did.
They took shares. It's almost undoubted. It's the only explanation, and we've been told this by whistleblowers, but the only explanation for the fact that the tax revenues are so... BP didn't pay any tax. This company didn't pay any tax. What the hell? What government?
They got rid of petroleum tax in 2015. Yeah, and Norway, they charged them 87% tax.
So what government doesn't get a profit from the oil and gas? So the question...
Very fishy.
So the question isn't... why doesn't our government want to profit from the oil and gas? The question is exactly how
are they profiting?
Well, you don't want Scotland to know how much it's producing and contributing to the UK, and you certainly don't want the world to know that you're defrauding the legitimate owners of.
Yeah, the last time they published Scotland's contribution was in 1921. You know, right. And they stopped doing that because of Ireland. They didn't want us to get above our station, get any ideas, did they? Yeah. Because we're actually contributing far more and getting back much less than we should. And that
we're a colony. We're
a colony, exactly.
But here's the disgusting thing they've done. Knowing that we own those assets and they actually administer them. If you drill right down into it, they're administering on behalf of the real beneficiaries. They know that.
They're doing a pretty lousy job, aren't they?
How do you get, if you're the trustee, imagine it's a trust fund, you're the trustee for this group of people who are the beneficiaries of the trust.
They're
And
stealing.
you want to steal their trust fund.
Mhm.
Here's what you do. You say, okay, we're going to sell you these things that are owned by the beneficiaries. We'll sell you them for nothing. And we won't tax you. But we'll take a nice fat profit in the form of shares on the back end that nobody will know about.
And then we'll sell it back to the Scots and make a lot more money.
And when we sell it to the Scots, we'll make, But, or no, we'll let other and bring in other companies and they can all make this money.
Other foreign governments own our assets.
Then they turn around and they tell Scotland, they literally at one time said, oil and gas are actually costing more to produce than they return.
Right.
No. And now that explains. You want the simple answer. You want to know why they haven't capped the oil and gas prices in Scotland. You want to know why, or in the UK, we are suffering the way that we are. Because every time one of these damn companies makes another big fat profit, the UK Treasury, the Exchequer, gets another big fat payment, which is secret and fraud and a crime.
They're basically subsidy junkies on Scotland's wealth. That's what they are.
Well, they are, and they don't mind how the people are suffering because they get more money.
Oh, they don't care at all. Yeah.
And that's where, and you want to see where that is at the moment.
Which is why they had to bury the Macron report,
Yes.
Of course, he was a unionist, of course, but he did say, look, if Scots found out about this oil wealth, which is, on the brink of being developed, they would be out of here faster than you could say, Jack Robin. We would be out. Because we would realize the wealth that we would have and have control over, should have control over, but it's been basically stolen from us. Yes. And the same thing is now happening with our renewables, and we can't let that happen again.
And what are we going to do? We're going to go and say to the English government, which and it is the English government. If you're starting with you're coming all the way through. You're talking about the English government. We're going to go to these people who have their vampire fangs in the jugular of Scotland and say, "Would you mind taking your fangs out? We'd like to stop. We'd like to stop feeding you."
We'll ask them politely. Maybe that will work. Yeah,
absolutely. Or we'll have a nice fair vote, which we will be guaranteed to see is completely above board and honest. So, so the territorial bit is what this is really all about.
Sure, it is.
And the fact that this was done in such an underhand way, and the only kind of paper trail we have is what they have to publish as undisclosed sources for the oil and gas.
Yeah.
But that means that when they come to do their Barnett formula, what's on paper is coming from Scotland is a fraction. And it means if we ever go to the international court and say they've been defrauding us because we're a sovereign territorial nation, hell, Scotland's found out. Then here's how much was coming in, and it's only a fraction of blah blah blah.
And we buy this ridiculous jurors accounting system that was foisted on us by John Major's Tory government, which is designed to make us look like we are poor. And people are still swallowing that. I mean, it's unbelievable how blinkered people have become in Scotland. Oh, we have a deficit. Do we really? Then why is it the UK government is so keen to hold on to us? Why are they subsidizing us if we're such a drain on their resources, if we're so poor? Why don't they just cut us loose and let us go? Wouldn't it be great for England? Because the opposite is true. That's why.
No, Leah, it's because they're so sorry for poor little Scotland. What would happen to the people?
They take pity on us. That's right. Yeah, they're sucking out all of our resources and everything else. And also, Scotland has been depopulated. We would be a nation of about 10 million people had we not had basically ethnic cleansing and genocide perpetrated on us by the larger partner in this so-called equal union. My ancestors were driven out during the Highland clearances.
I know many of mine were and ended up in America.
Yeah,
we have every single marker for a colony, every single
totally.
one. So what I was going to say, the fun to be had with this, and I really, the first thing we have to do in Scotland is we have to get educated and we have to get angry. The second thing that we have to do is we have to be prepared. When an abusive marriage is coming to an end, quite often
get a good lawyer. Get a good lawyer.
Quite often the abused partner will run. They'll leave with nothing more than the clothes on their back, anything to get away. And they'll take all right, we'll lose all of it, everything we brought, blah blah blah, and they will gradually rebuild. And that is one route. And that is what our politicians have been proposing, really virtually, for the last couple of decades, that we beg, we plead, we make trouble until they agree to let us go. We negotiate those conditions. They'll want some of the oil and gas. We'll have to take some of the debt. They want to be the continuator state, which means that everything we brought, we had fantastic alliances. Scots were citizens of France and vice versa.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that'd be nice today. We have EU citizenship again. Yeah.
We had fantastic, wonderful alliances and relationships with.
Even today, Scots are genuinely liked around the world. The same can't really be said for our southern neighbor.
But but because of the empire. But the fact is,
We're
supposed to walk away from our UK and leave England with poor Northern Ireland and Wales as the continuator state, and leave everything that we brought to the Union, built up over years. We're to have nothing in this divorce, according to them. So this is the next stage: educate, get angry, fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fight.
Take the gloves off, and as nicely as possible. Well, we need to take the gloves off. Absolutely.
We don't walk away from
and be armed with the truth.
Yeah. In fact, let's turn the whole independence argument on its head. We are not leaving this union until we have taken back every damn thing that belongs to Scotland.
Right, including all the things that have been stolen from us.
Every single thing. We're a sovereign territorial nation. You can buy your oil, your gas, and renewables from us. We'll do a deal on that.
And they're going to certainly need it, that's for sure.
And we will have the kind of democracy that was embryonically developing in Scotland before the treaty. We will have the people back sovereign. Switzerland can do it. Why not us? We've got the constitutional principles there. Let's do that. And by the way, that's you, Supreme Court, out. Court of Session's the highest court in Scotland. And by the way, that will answer to the people the way it does under constitutional law as well. There will be no more judicial corruption in Scotland. We're going to put all that back. And the next time Westminster says, Scotland, you can't do that, we will turn around and say, what do you think, people? Have a referendum. And that's where it comes to these opinion polls, these consultative referendums. In a country where the people of Scotland are sovereign, how on earth can anything be an opinion poll?
No.
If they're the final word.
Can we look at the seventh lie, which is that this Treaty of Union was actually replaced by the Acts of Union when it was ratified, and Scotland's Parliament just sort of vanished. It was extinguished.
Well, the treaty actually says quite clearly that both parliaments were extinguished and this new parliament was created. We know that, in fact, that's another lie. They just continued the English Parliament. And, Lord Cooper famously said, I can't quote it verbatim, but there's this assumption that this notion that what happened at the Treaty of Union was that the Scots simply joined the English Parliament. That is not what happened.
No.
In law, so there's two things: there's de jure, that's what's in law, and in practice, de facto. So de jure, this didn't happen. In practice, this is exactly
it certainly did. And with half a brain can see that's what happened. Yeah.
So what they have said, their arguments are just, the more you go into them, the more you're left with your jaw on the floor and just how the hell people bought this for so long.
Yeah, that is pretty amazing.
And
I really thought Brexit would be a sort of a point where Scotland would wake up and say, well, wait a minute, hang on a second. 62% of us voted to remain, and this would be an opportunity to show that maybe the treaty's been violated.
But you see, it was as part of the whole United Kingdom, and as a whole, the United Kingdom voted to leave. And we'll just forget the sections.
Yeah. We'll just conveniently push those under the carpet. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. The problem that the people are sovereign in Scotland over their government doesn't arise if it's an English government and parliamentary sovereignty applies. Again, proof of a colony. And that's what I'm saying. We need to turn this on its head, and we need to be prepared to fight.
And if you look at the new sort of Windsor Agreement, I hate that term, but the fact that Northern Ireland now has favorable trading with the European Union and the UK, whereas Scotland does not, that is a clear violation of Article 6 of the Treaty of Union.
It's a deal breaker. It's a complete.
What are we doing? What are we doing about it?
We're not a colony, but we can't do anything without permission of the English Parliament and its constitution.
Right.
But we're not a colony because we don't have our own constitution. We can't even uphold the treaty, but we're not a colony. But how they argue about the Treaty of Union is they say, all right, so in fact, at least legally, both parliaments were extinguished. a new parliament was created. Let's move away from parliaments. 2 states signed that treaty, the state of Scotland and the state of England. That is what makes it an international treaty. Now, here it is again. Here's their perfect little argument, and I heard it recently from a lawyer whom I respect deeply, lovely guy. The 2 states cease to exist, but since any treaty is between states, once they cease to exist, the treaty can't really be called a treaty anymore, because now you have a new state. So you need to look to that's why you look to the acts of ratification, and any act, of course, comes under the authority of the Parliament. So the treaty creates this Parliament, but now the treaty is gone, and there's a Parliament left, and we're dealing with a parliamentary statute. So the treaty what is left of the treaty is actually the Act of Union passed by the English Parliament. You'll be surprised to hear they're the same, so it barely matters, but it's under control of the Parliament.
Yeah, very clever.
What a lovely, well, there we are stuffed. Just one tiny thing. Who says treaties are created only between states? Have you checked that, guys? Because let me tell you something.
They're not, are they? No.
Treaties can be conducted between states. In international law, it's about having personhood and standing in international law as a person in international law. A state has standing as a person in international law. So do certain international corporations. So do nations. That's why it's really important for the gas bags in the Supreme Court or in Westminster to talk about Scotland as a territory. Territories can't enter into treaties. Nations can. That's why they want now to say that Scotland became a territory. But there's there's more than one massive problem with that. How is a nation defined in international law? Well, let's have a look. Do we have a discrete territorial area? Yes, not only that, but it is a sovereign territorial nation, landmass area. Do we have a history of our own? Do we have a constitution of our own? Do we have
culture, a language, all the things that go with nationhood? Yeah, of course.
So we were a nation prior to the treaty. It isn't possible for a treaty conducted by a parliament and a monarch who is not sovereign to extinguish a nation that has been there for 1,000 years. They don't have that authority. That's what this UK stroke British stroke English establishment is trying to shove down our throats. And to our shame, our legal establishment, our political establishment, the civil service, and our academic educational establishment have swallowed what is
they've been totally captured by the colonizer. I mean, there are 3 elements of being a colony. One is when you have you acquire full or partial political control over a nation. That's definitely happened. 82% of English controlled Parliament in Westminster. Number 2, you occupy it with settlers from the colonizer nation. We've had over the past 50 years 2 million English moving to Scotland, and many Scots have left for opportunities elsewhere because we don't have them here. And number 3. The colony is exploited economically. Well, I think we've laid out the number of ways that Scotland has been exploited. Yes. So we are clearly a colony.
Of course we are. Of course we are. But we're not going
to get out of this, Sarah. Just to, I think the politicians have failed us. The political parties have failed us. Now it's really down to the Scottish people and restoring our confidence, our knowledge, educating us about what our history and our Constitution actually are, that give us the wherewithal, the power, the ability, which we've had all along, to get out of this and save our nation and become, a proud nation of Scotland once again.
Yes, and let's not give the Westminster government the satisfaction of trying to force them to agree that we're a colony. We don't want to get tied up in that. We need to let's get angry, let's get educated, let's get justice.
There's plenty to be angry about.
Let's take a very simple question to the international community and to the international court. Can you look at all of this, please? here, and this is a dossier, that we,
loads of evidence. Yeah.
here is the proof that they say we're in a voluntary union, but we are a de facto colony. Can you please clarify? We're not going to ask you to declare us a colony. We're not going to ask that you say Scotland has a right to independence, because we know you just say we'll have a vote, and and we can't. We certainly can't have one that's safe. So instead, could you get us clarification? And by the way, we're quite happy for the UK government to answer that question clearly. Are we in a voluntary union, or are we in a colony? However, we want a rider to the answer. If we are in a voluntary union, where is the proof that it's voluntary? Where are the rights, the liberties, the privileges that belong to Scotland that were agreed?
What makes it voluntary? Yeah.
If we are voluntary, then these things have to go back in place. So we want it put in such a way that it's not, of course you're voluntary. That's the end of it. If we're voluntary, then show it, prove. Then you have to prove it. If we are voluntary, this is true. Our constitution is true. What you agreed to is true. What we're entitled to is true. That we're a sovereign territorial nation is true. We will now put in place something like the Swiss have, so that you will always be answerable to the people in Scotland. We have a practical
or just re-establish what we used to have, the Convention of the Estates, create a new mechanism for the people's voice to be heard and understood, and to exercise exercise authority that we have.
Yes, so that we can impeach our politicians, whether in Scotland.
Exactly. Wouldn't that be satisfying right now? I would love to do that.
So we can remove them, so that we can cry salvo, and then we can set up a public body to manage our own resources. And I'm really going to enjoy watching how that affects our colonizer. When it's either that, you either agree to that, and we will do that. We will have a movement big enough to do that here. Demand it, do it, get it.
Right.
Or you won't. You will have a time. We will have a time scale to have it done. If you don't, if you refuse, if you say Scotland is not entitled to that, which makes it a voluntary union, then you are saying we're a colony. So which is it? And they can answer, and they won't. They'll do everything they can to prevaricate. But if we make it very, very simple, we are or we're not. Prove it.
So we need all of you who are out there listening to sign up if you haven't done so already. Talk to your friends and family and everyone you know. Tell them about Liberation.Scot and Salva, which is the campaign arm of Liberation, where we have all of this amazing information about what the reality of Scotland's constitutional history is. And let's get organized and let's do this. We can do it. We can take back what's always been ours, and that has been stolen from us by a so-called union that has never done us any favors. In fact, has really harmed us tremendously. So I encourage you all to go and visit the website. And yeah, we hope to see you again in a future chat. And thank you so much, Sara, for all of the work you've done and all the knowledge you've accumulated and are sharing with us. We're really grateful.
Thank you for distilling it down and keeping this focused. It's such a there's so much.
It's huge, but I think we have to have some simple messages, and they're out there. Basically, that the huge fraud has been perpetrated on Scotland by our partner in this union, and we're not going to put up with it anymore. I think we're done,
and we're not crawling away after 300 years of vicious criminal abuse, genocide, murder, with nothing to our name. This is our country. This was our land. These are our resources.
It's about time we take it back, isn't it? Yeah.
Let's go. Let's take that back. And then we can walk out of this marriage with our heads held high and something back in place that we can be proud to call an independent Scotland.
Absolutely. Salvo to that.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.